Welcome back to an unexpected fight. It's been a bit since we've seen you guys, and we're so excited to be back. I know the hiatus was a little unexpected, but we're getting ready to get back in the full swing of things. I'm here today again with my co-host Kelly, and we are also joined by Jon and Jenn Wall, and Kelly's going to do our introduction.
So today we're honored to welcome Jen and Jon Wall, the founders of Zach's Bridge, a nonprofit born out of profound love, unimaginable loss, and an unwavering commitment to ensuring that no parent faces advanced pediatric cancer alone. After losing their son Zach to cancer, Jen and Jon transformed their grief into purpose by creating Zach's Bridge, an organization dedicated to providing one-on-one peer support for parents and caregivers navigating advanced or end-of-life pediatric cancer journeys. What began as their own search for someone who truly understood has grown into a lifeline for families across the country. Jen and Jon, thank you so much for being here today and for the bridge that you've built for so many. First, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about Zach, who he was, what he loved, and how his journey with cancer shaped your family.
Jen, you want to go first?
Sure. So Zach was a unique kid. He had the best sense of humor. He had become a very sarcastic teenager, courtesy of his parents. He had a love of all animals, but especially dogs and horses. And supercars was his thing, which is one of the reasons why we're called Zach's Bridge, because he liked things that went over a bridge. But Zach was also a complex kid. He was born early. He was a fighter from day one. And he struggled with social and emotional challenges from a very early age. And so things like making friendships and playing team sports and, getting through a school day without complication were really challenging for him. And so he went to therapeutic boarding school after he finished elementary school. And at the time that he got sick, he had really started to make friends. And really just was finding himself. And, he was weathering the pandemic like we all were. But he was really starting to become who he was more happy with who he was as a person. Jon?
It's, cancer journeys are so traumatic, and Zach just got cut down. He was really kind of approaching a time of growth and becoming who he was. And so Zach was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, bone cancer, in January of 2021. He had a 6-inch tumor about the size of a hot dog bun below his left knee, and he was metastatic from the start. They had to amputate his left leg above the knee. It was the only way to cut out the primary tumor. And his metastases were just so dramatic that there wasn't very many surgical options. And so he passed away after 10 and a half months in November of 2021 at the age of 16 and a half. And we miss him every single day and work hard to try to help families that are going through what we have.
I love that story. Especially, talking about him coming into himself and being able to get to see part of that change. And while I know that missing him is a lot, I feel excited for you guys that you got to see that. Nora died so young. I didn't get to see a lot of that personality change or that spunkiness really come out, which I can tell you right now that it was going to be rough. I was going to have a rough teenage years with her because she was so spicy just from the get-go. But I love that you guys were able to share some of that time with him. And it makes us just so grateful for those moments that we did get to have with our kids, even looking back on it saying, hey, like, this was hard. I hate that I went through this, but I've told people before, like, they've asked me, like, would you change anything knowing what you had to live through? And I was like, absolutely not. I would still have her. I would still love the experience that I had with her while I had her, and I would never go back and change a thing. But, for me, shortly after Nora passed away, I started my nonprofit. So what prompted you guys to start Zach's Bridge? And, like, was there a specific moment in time you realized that there was something missing in pediatric bereavement or pediatric cancer care that just like had that light bulb moment for you?
Jen, you want me to start with that?
You start. I'll add to whatever
You
you
know, I think I'll take you back to a very specific moment in time. It was June 19th, 2021. It was a Friday. It was 2 days before Father's Day. 2 days after we were told Zach was terminal. We sat in Boston Children's Hospital with the palliative care team, and I put my head in my hands and had a big cry. I'd cried before because I knew where Zach was headed. And even before he was terminal, we knew that was going to be where he was going, but I lost it. Right. And that moment in time for me, Jen had already kind of come to an understanding of where we were, but it was really tough. And little did we know, we only had 139 days left. And the things that happened from that moment on and into bereavement shaped everything we were doing, because we had questions about all these things at that point in time before he passed, things about palliative care and hospice and tissue donation, and things that no other parent, if you haven't had a kid, lost a kid to an illness like this, you can't answer, right? And there's so many things that, as much as people wanted to support us, whether it was our medical team, friends and family, whatever, it was really difficult. And so we searched for parents that had this lived experience. We couldn't find them. And that's where we kind of had this light bulb moment of there's a gap here. There's this opportunity to help people and do something that no one else is really doing with that one-to-one peer support. There's peer support that you can find in groups, right? Whether that's a Facebook group or an online group or groups at your hospital or whatever, but those are scheduled. Those are like, well, okay, one Thursday a month, you can meet for 6 times. People, and Tiffany, I'm sure you would, understand this better than anybody. People need support when they need support, and having that one-to-one connection of somebody who understands you and you can say, I get it, I see you, I feel you, I've got you, whether you're a mom or a dad, is so important. And then as we were going through that and after Zach passed, we had a number of conversations with, parents going through the same thing. And it was so isolating and so alone. Even though you had people around you, you still felt like nobody got you. And we're like, we have an opportunity to do something that will fundamentally change the journey for pediatric cancer parents. We're not going to cure cancer, but we're going to make it maybe just a little bit easier and a little bit just not better, but just a simpler way to navigate this tremendous loss. Jen, anything you want to add to that?
I think the one thing I would add is that we went through cancer during such a different time. Going through cancer during a global pandemic, our entire journey was in 2021 at the height of COVID. And so you didn't talk to anyone. The kitchen was closed. You didn't talk to people in the waiting room. And we got into bereavement when we started to meet people, and they're like, "Oh, didn't you find your community people?" And I said, "No." I said, the goal was get in, get out, and don't get COVID on top of cancer. And so you didn't talk to people. Everybody was sort of in their own like little silo, trying to sort of breathe their own, air and not anybody else's. And so it was very hard to find support at different times. And our cancer journeys are very different. Jon and I's are very different. I wanted to talk to someone the day Zach was diagnosed who had not experienced a win, so to speak, from childhood cancer. And I couldn't find it. It wasn't there. And then as time went on and we knew where things were headed, there were questions that we had, and there were things we wanted to talk to. I'm actually the daughter of a pediatrician. My father hasn't lost his own child. So I can't talk to anyone about that in a way that they've walked in the same shoes that we've walked in. And sometimes you just want to talk to another person who has heard the same words. There's nothing more that we can do to cure and save your child.
Absolutely. I think Tiffany and I can relate to that as far as the COVID times and when it happened. All of us, same thing. My daughter was diagnosed towards the middle to end of 2020, and when it had just started. And you're spot on. There wasn't a lot of resources at the moment. It felt very isolating. So absolutely, I think it's amazing what you guys have created.
Get treatment at that point.
Right.
I mean, I talked to a new support seeker of ours recently whose child was diagnosed in 2020, and they couldn't even get him in to have a CT scan to confirm the diagnosis. I mean, it was a different world.
Different world.
Yeah, we were diagnosed in November of 21. So still all of the crazy COVID protocols, and you couldn't have, more than 2 people in the room, and siblings couldn't come. It was COVID messed a lot of stuff up.
It did. And yet, people will talk about how awful COVID was that first year. And to me, like, our world is divided into before Zach's diagnosis and after.
Yeah.
And so that first year, what I can tell you is that we were all home. We were all healthy. I baked a lot of bread. I did a lot of puzzles, and we all tried to co-work in one space, which was challenging at best, but we were together and we were all healthy. Whereas after January 15th of 2021, it was a different world for us, and as it was for both of you.
Absolutely. You did such a good job of answering so many of my questions, so I'm going to skip ahead. How does the peer matching work, and what can a family expect after they request support?
Jon, I will definitely take this one. So I'm the clinician of the two of us, so I do all of the intakes. So when parents and caregivers are referred to Zaxbridge, either they refer themselves or a healthcare provider can refer them. Friends and family can't specifically fill out the referral form, but they can give it to their, the family to do themselves. We try and connect with that parent within hours. It's usually less than hours. We try and schedule an intake as quickly as possible because, as Jon said earlier, when you need support, you need support. I can't speak for the middle of the night referrals that come in, and I would have been the same person doing it because I didn't sleep when Zach was sick, and so I was scouring the internet for answers at all hours. But you can be sure that first thing the next morning, I'm contacting that person. We usually meet via Zoom. I do all of the intakes. If there's a dad who's also kind of, as Jon would say, being dragged along, as is often the case, Jon joins me. And one of the questions I do ask is about matching. I ask our support seekers, what would be important to you in matching with a peer mentor? And it falls along 3 separate lines, basically. Some people want something in the disease type area. So I'd really like a peer whose child had a similar cancer to me, because there's things we talk about. Or I don't, because that's too close to home. I really don't want that. Sometimes they want someone whose child was a similar age going through cancer. Our journey with a teenager, very different than yours, Tiffany, with a very young child. And so there are things you want to be able to talk about with your peer. The third is what happens most frequently, and it's something about the family dynamic. I'm a single mom. I have surviving children. I'm a mom of twins. I'm an only child mom. And in creating that match and trying to match on the things that are important to the support seeker, it creates that instant connection, that commonality, and that trust. So there's no hesitancy in opening up and having these really deep, meaningful conversations. Going through a cancer journey, you both know this. How many times do you tell your child's story to a new clinician and, a new set of people? And that's the last thing you want to do when you're accessing peer support. You want to be able to connect. You want to feel less isolated. And so having that extra something, whether it's disease or age or something in the family dynamic, just creates that innate rapport. And so they can start having these really important conversations quickly.
I think that's so important that you do it that way. The hospital we were treated at actually did have some sort of peer mentorship. And I'll never forget, the first person that reached out to me was a mom of a leukemia survivor. And here I am dealing with a stage 4 brain cancer diagnosis that has a 10% survival rate. And I said, thank you, but I'm good. Like I didn't even know how to, there was just, it's hard to connect on that level. So I love that you guys dig deep and do your due diligence as to like, what are you looking for? And do you want the same tumor? I think that's extremely important and extremely rare. You're right. I haven't seen other organizations doing it this way and at this level. So, props to you guys for really thinking it through.
I love that. As a nurse practitioner who worked in oncology. Like when Nora was diagnosed, she was diagnosed metastatic as well. And so like me as a clinician, I knew what the outcome of that would be, but to try to alleviate all the worry and pain and stress from my family, I'm like, I don't say anything, right? I'm not like, this is a death sentence. And I keep that all to myself. But one of the first people to reach out to me was another mom who had an infant who had ETMR that actually lived like 30 miles away from me, and her son had just passed like 6 months prior. And we really didn't talk that much, but just knowing like that she reached out to me and said, hey, I'm here, like if you need to talk, like just message me. And so now I actually, even people reach out to me all the time just because of Facebook and whatnot, and they know my story, and they'll say, hey, so and so just found out their kid has cancer. And I don't know these people, and I'm like, hey, connect me with them. And then I send them this beautiful poem that somebody sent me, and it's like, hey, dear new cancer mom, like your world just flipped upside down. It's like this long, beautiful thing about emotions that nobody else understands. And so I'm like, hey, I'm here. Here's this beautiful poem that helped me. Like, if you need me to reach out. And so, like, I commend you guys for what you're doing, because, like, having terminally ill children, regardless of what wants to accept that their child is terminal, and I think there's a lot of families who refuse to accept that their children aren't going to make it, which is also a struggle to like try to get them the help they need on the front end. But I really love what you guys are doing. So like what's one of the most powerful testimonies that you guys have gotten from like connecting one of these peers with another parent that y'all have facilitated?
Let me go first, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first started Zach's Bridge, we were really focused on what we call pre-bereavement, which is that terminal to the end stage, right? And so that's, people say that's anticipatory grief, that's making sense of all the changes that happen to you as an individual and all the things around you and figuring out how to maximize your time. But then early on, people are saying, well, we have to do bereavement as well. And so we said, okay, you know what? Our training's the same. Our approach is going to be the same. We're bereaved. We can absolutely do that. And so one of the first bereaved dads that we ever talked with, he was 7 weeks out, and we talked. And I was his peer mentor at that point. Jen and I were the only peer mentors at that point in time. Now we have 22, trained peer mentors, and we just talked about all the things that are different, and it's okay that work's different and family's different and you feel different. You're confused and you have brain fog and you're sad and you're angry and all of these things. And at the end, he said to me, I thought I was going crazy, but I can breathe again now. That's a big deal, right? I mean, just one conversation. That's the only time I ever talked to him. That's all he needed to know that he wasn't doing it wrong, and that all of this was normal. And to hear that from somebody else that had gone through it just made all the world of difference to him, right? Jen, you want any stories you want to share?
That's the one I would have shared. So I think you said it. I mean, I think the only other one, also coincidentally, is a dad that Jon. I've never talked to this dad, but because of the work that Jon did with this dad, that family chose to get an autopsy and tissue donation, which in the world of pediatric cancer is still very rare, but so important for having, making any progress in especially the really hard to treat cancers. And so, we always talk about how when it's parent to parent, it lands differently. There's not an ulterior motive, and there isn't for physicians, but even they sense it. When I went to Zach's physician and said, I need something good to come of this, and she said, oh, thank God, I hate having this conversation with families. I've already told them I can't save their child, and now I'm asking them for something else. And in the case of Zach's autopsy, we went over it with her after, and she practices medicine different because of it. He had what were called MYC tumors, which were very aggressive osteosarcoma tumors, and he developed mets in the dura of his brain very, very quickly. And so she now scans her osteo patients with brain MRIs much sooner in the process because of what she learned from Zach. It didn't save Zach. Nothing we could have done would have saved Zach. But if it makes it slightly easier for the next family, if it gives them more time with their child, then that's worth everything at the end of the day. And it's just, because everything we do is virtual, it allows us to connect in ways that work for our support seekers. So some of our support seekers meet with their peer mentor regularly via Zoom or Teams or some sort of video. But some of them, especially I would say a lot of the parents in pre-bereavement, they're still going back and forth to the hospital. I have one mom I work with who I know I'm going to hear from her when her child's having scans, because scanxiety is so real. And she just needs to sort of brain dump on me all of the conflicting things that she's feeling while she's sitting in that waiting room. You can't do that with anybody else. And so she and I have what one of our other support seekers called a PRN texting relationship. And so when I do intakes with new support seekers, I always say, how do you kind of see this? If you have an idea of how this might work for you, do you see yourself as wanting to have something regularly scheduled? Or is it something more just sort of what we call this PRN texting? And that's helpful for people because it gives them a little bit of an idea of how peer mentoring can work. And then that also allows me, when I go to our peer mentors, to check for their availability, to say, this is what this person is looking for. Do you have the time for this? And that was something that actually came out of their feedback and that they find very helpful as part of the process. But we're able to serve people globally, as we're doing now in 2 countries. We're about to train our first Canadian peer mentor because technology is what it is. We have a French support seeker who we use WhatsApp with because it allows them to have instantaneous real-time translation while they're talking. I did her intake that way because we just couldn't, her English wasn't good enough in her view to have a conversation. So we did everything via WhatsApp, and we do have Spanish speaking support. We have a Spanish speaking peer mentor who's a native Spanish speaker. We also have a staff member who speaks Spanish who can help us with intakes. As we continue to grow, I would assume that will grow too.
It's incredible that you've been able to expand in that way. Congratulations to you all. I don't think I even realized that when I was looking through the website. So that's amazing. We talked a lot about, the emotional states and the fears and, like this family that was experiencing scanxiety, which I think we can all very much relate to in the cancer world. What are some of those emotional states and fears that they unload on you? What kind of things do parents tell you, or things maybe you yourself struggled with during those times?
Jon, you want me to go first? Or you want to start?
Sure, you go first.
I think one of the things that's come up with several parents recently that I think is super important is they will ask us to talk about what the last few minutes of Zach's life were like and how that went. And it's never the same for two families. I can guarantee, Tiffany, our story is different than yours. I can tell you that every parent who's told me about their child passing away when it is a bereavement parent, it's a different story. I think what really comes down to is the uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty in a pediatric cancer diagnosis. It's uncertain from day one to day forever. But you're looking for, and I can tell you myself, I was always looking for answers and looking for a little shot of certainty at some point. I can't tell you the number of times I asked our oncologist, once he was terminal, do you have any idea of a time frame? I just want to know what we want to maximize what we have left. And she couldn't. Even she was surprised that he passed away as quickly as he did. And I think a lot of that anxiety and that fear is of the unknown. What are those last few days going to be like? What is it going to be like to watch my child stop eating, stop drinking, start to, just decline? For me, I would tell you, and I also say this as a pediatric palliative care social worker, I think the earlier you can get palliative care and hospice in place, the better. Our hospice experience, if you could describe it as magical, was magical. I wasn't calling clinic to get overrides, to get more pills. Things magically appeared at the door. Our hospice nurse was wonderful and talked to us about what that was going to be like. We knew that Zach was going to stop eating. So we knew some of those things. And I think just that unknown, and there's so many unknowns that parents are expressing, no matter what their phase is. Bereavement is another piece of unknown. How long am I going to grieve? Well, the answer is you're always going to grieve. But is it going to feel different as you proceed into your grief journey?
I think, Kelly, just to, kind of summarize the things that we see consistently, it's feelings of isolation. Like, nobody wants to talk to me. People avoid me. I just don't feel right in the world the way I did before. It's frequently about family dynamics, my relationship with my spouse. We're not marriage counselors, but frequently understanding that your spouse or partner is going to grieve differently at different times. And knowing that that's okay is really important. Sometimes, depending on what stage you're in, it's the brain fog and the loss of memory and the confusion, right? It's all the things that people go through with loss and grief that nobody really knows about. But just when another parent says, "I'm feeling this," and then you can say, "Totally get it. I had that." So many other parents I know felt that, and just making it feel like you're not alone. That's so much of what we do overall. But sometimes it's also, we can share a helpful resource, or we know of something. One thing that I talk about all the time with parents is this theory of both and. We learned this in our bereavement class from Boston Children's, and knowing that it's okay for me to be happy while I'm sad, or be angry while I'm okay, right? And have both of those feelings at the same time, and know that I'm not dishonoring Zach, or I'm not doing grief the wrong way. So empowering for me, because that's the way I make my way through the world every single day now. Every day I'm sad and I miss him and I'm angry about it. But I'm also happy about so many things, and proud of the work we're doing, and all this. And it's both and all the time.
I like to use the term two things can be true. So that's kind of how I've summed up my grief journey. And what you're saying, Jon, is I can be happy, but I can also be sad, and I can be angry. And I think there's so many parents who don't realize all of the resources in bereavement that are out there. I attended a couple of groups. I didn't know about Zach's Bridge, which y'all created when I would have needed it. So definitely so glad we have y'all on today, that it can help somebody else listening. And Jen, to kind of go back what you were talking about like hospice and palliative care and introducing that early, do you have any parents who reach out to you and they're not really ready for like the bereavement stuff yet, but they've somehow found themselves in Zach's Bridge and like coming to you guys for supportive care, but they're
Yes.
not accepting of that
Yes.
terminal diagnosis yet?
Yes. Different. I go back to brain tumors, because brain tumors, tend to have a worse prognosis. And Kelly, I just, again, I think just the fact that your daughter is still here is just so incredible. I have a mom that I work with whose child has had a glioblastoma for all 16 years of her life. She has had 7 or 8 recurrences at this point, and she is not terminal, but she has been in the hospital with her daughter, and the team has said, "We don't think she's going to survive the night. You should get your husband here." And she wanted to talk to someone who's heard similar things. She knows that her child's life may be shortened, but she's not, they don't need hospice right now. They could benefit from palliative care, but she is not, she is pre-reaved to an extent, but it was really just finding another person to connect with who gets it, who's heard similar language. The families that we tend to get the earliest are the incurable brain tumors, the DIPGs and the DMGs. And they're coming to us early in their journey. Their child may not even be really symptomatic and declining yet. And they're, they're coming at a time which is how we really conceived of Zach's Bridge, was getting people in sooner so that they would have that support, because we see the support drop off once you are told that your child is terminal. And so having someone as you go through those last days and into bereavement is super important, in terms of just feeling more connection and not feeling that isolation. And just, you have all these questions and you can go on the internet, but you don't know the kind of answers you're getting. Whereas when you work with a Zaxbridge peer, all of our peers have lived experience and they also go through extensive training. So we know that they're giving consistent answers, to some of these really difficult questions.
Tiffany, I want to just add to that a little bit, right? I mean, I think you asked, what if somebody finds us and they're not ready, right? I mean, a couple of things. For us to have a meaningful peer relationship, it's as peers, we're not trained as therapists. It's not our job to help an individual understand the reality of the illness that they have or their child has. So it's really important that they are there in some way, whether they're going to lose or have lost or whatever. Otherwise, that peer relationship probably won't be super impactful. And it may also be damaging for the peer mentor because the peer mentor has lost somebody as well. And all that, and they're there to help, right? So it's really important that they're there. We have had people that aren't a fit. We've also had people come to our website and realize that the one-to-one model may not be right for them. They may want something else, or they may need something that we don't provide, right? So we have a whole app that we've built called the Resource Explorer, designed for pre-bereaved and bereaved parents and caregivers, that's really designed to help people find those in a new way. Now, everybody has a resource listing, but we don't want the alphabetical ones. We're Zaxbridge. We're at the bottom of that list. So we've kind of reinvented that and looked at new ways of solving that and providing almost like a Yelp score for pediatric cancer resources for late stage families overall. And it's not just peer support. It can be financial support. It can be all these different things. And we're kind of rethinking that. And that's a lot of what we try to do is think about hard problems that, maybe there's been a solution, but maybe hasn't been optimal, or maybe that hasn't been a solution. And can we do this a different way?
But to touch on that, because you mentioned that the family themselves, has to reach out. Do you partner with healthcare providers as well, like child life specialists and social workers and medical teams, to be able to, refer Zaxbridge? Because we do have a lot of various listeners on this podcast. So in case we have any medical professionals going, oh, how do I share this resource with families? What would you tell them?
Absolutely. So, I mean, a medical professional can absolutely refer a family. About 60% of the referrals we get are from usually social workers, but sometimes from nurses or doctors, or other individuals, right? And then, so, when they go online, there's just a request a peer form, and you can determine who are you, and based on who you are you the provider, or are you the individual? You'll get the information you need. That'll get to us, and usually within minutes or hours, we've responded and scheduled a time to talk. What's super interesting is sometimes other organizations can take a couple days for them to respond. We're on that immediately because we know when you need support, you need support. There was an example just a couple of weeks ago where we were doing an intake of a mom and a dad on a Saturday and met with them for the first time. And then we assigned a peer mentor to meet with the mom to be the ongoing conversation. And the mom talked to, our peer mentor talked to that mom later that day, like instant, like it's quick, because you don't want people lingering with their own thoughts, and you just need somebody to say, I get it. Right. And so, not only are we super committed to ensuring that those responses happen quickly, but our peer mentors are as well.
Wonderful.
That's so cool. I love what you guys are doing with all of this. So kind of a little bit of a pivot, but what misconceptions do people have about the psychosocial side of pediatric cancer, especially in these late stage, terminal, end of life situations that they may not be expecting?
Jen, you want to go first on that?
Nope, I want to hear you go first, actually.
Okay. Oops. So, I think, there's so many just misunderstandings about it, right? I mean, from my perspective, I mean, there's so many things I could talk about here, but dads need support too, right? Not every dad is willing to talk about it, but it's moms are the primary in clinic and in the hospital, right? They're the ones who know all the details about every aspect of treatment. Dads are like, yeah, my kid has cancer, right? And that's it. Social workers, need to break through and work through the moms to reach out to dads to let them know that it's okay that, dads need to talk about this. There's serious stuff here, whether you're in treatment and survivorship, right? Whether you're in bereavement or bereavement, I think that's a misperception, right? That dads can't be and shouldn't be ignored. We're so grateful we have a number of different dads that can match up with other dads that we help overall. One of the things I do outside of Zaxbridge is I co-lead a virtual support group for dads called Dadcology, which is part of Momcology. Everybody's heard of Momcology, but someday everybody will have heard of Dadcology. So, twice a month we get dads together of all stages, and we just talk about being a dad with a kid who's had cancer or had a loss, and it's absolutely amazing. I mean, there's so many other things. Palliative care is so misunderstood, and people get scared by it, and it can be so incredibly helpful when it's done right to make it easier for the child, easier for the family. It can be so incredibly valuable. Jen, what do you want to add to that?
Well, you took my palliative care, so that was really where I was going with it, because I think palliative care can be a more holistic approach to an illness, and it is very misunderstood. People have often asked me, well, what would you have done differently? Would you have stopped treatment? Would you have gone for a second opinion? And I still get asked that all the time. And I said, no, but he should have been on palliative care from day one, and he could have spent more than half of his journey on hospice, and it would have benefited him, because we did not know that that concurrent care is the standard in pediatric hospice. And for a teenager who doesn't want to go to clinic, who was known to curse, very audibly every time he walked into clinic, that would have improved his quality of life. And from a psychosocial standpoint, especially when you're dealing with what is a terminal diagnosis or what could potentially be a terminal diagnosis, quality of life is so, so important. And I think the orientation is to treat and cure. And there's not as much of an emphasis on quality of life. And it doesn't matter what age your child is. When you're dragging them in to have poison put in their body to hopefully cure the cancer in their body, we need to consider all the other things that are affecting it. And in Zach's case, we always had to have an echocardiogram and a hearing test before he'd have the next round of chemo, because the chemo would affect his hearing and his cardiac functioning. We don't, it's very formulaic of you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. There's nothing about quality of life that comes in there. And I think once you work with a palliative team, it's much more about quality of life. It's symptom management. Yes, it can be about end of life, but it doesn't always have to be about end of life. In where we were treated, they're now starting to call it more supportive oncology, which I'm hoping really starts to turn the tide in people's reaction to well, would you like to talk to the palliative care team? Because if people think they know what palliative care is, they equate it with hospice, they equate it with death. And there's so much more to it. It's one of the reasons I became a pediatric palliative care social worker. It's such an amazing field, and the people you get to work with, and there is joy, there is happiness, there's sadness, there's tears. It goes back to that. There's more than one truth. There's both and I wish that more people were given the opportunity to have palliative care be part of their experience, because they look at the whole family. They don't just look at mom. They don't just look at the patient. They look at dad. They look at siblings. They look at extended family. And I think it's so much more all-inclusive and a cancer journey is all-inclusive. It's not just the patient.
You're exactly who I would want to walk into my room if I was going through this experience, honestly, with your background. And I mean, it's just incredible, truly, what you guys have done. So we'll kind of wrap it up, because if not, Tiffany and we could talk probably for like 4 hours about this. But I don't think people want to listen to a 4-hour long podcast episode. So when you envision the future of Zach's Bridge, what do you hope that every family that's facing this advanced pediatric cancer will experience?
I mean, I hope we never need to exist, right? That's the hope, right? We're doing this work because it needs to happen. And we think that in our lifetime, the likelihood that cancer is going to be cured, or, such huge improvements that it's not going to be needed, that's not going to happen. So as long as we're here, this is our way of helping other people, and our way of leaving Zach's legacy and mark on the world. But over time, as we expect, we're going to continue to grow rapidly and scale, where there's so many more parents and caregivers that need help with one-to-one peer support. Can we expand our quantifiable measurements to prove out that this model works, not just with anecdotal stories and all of that? Can we continue to do innovative things that will improve the patient and family experience while people are going through these horrible experiences over time? We are looking to, can we expand our support for parents and caregivers to do one-to-one peer support for siblings. Older siblings would have to be older siblings that are 18 or older because of parental rights and all of that. And then potentially even over time, can we apply what we're doing to other for other bereaved parents and other parents that are facing loss outside of cancer?
Couldn't have said it better.
If you guys had one piece of advice that you would give pediatric cancer families, whether it be someone who's just diagnosed, someone who is in the terminal space, or a bereaved parent, what would that be?
You want to go first, Jen?
Mine is 2. One is give yourself grace. This is not easy. And the second is ask for palliative care.
Mine would be find your people, right? So there's lots of resources out there, but they're not the right resource for everybody, but there are people out there. So you have to work with your social work team, work with the community around you to find people you can connect with and overcome that sense of isolation and dread and fear just by having somebody who says that I've got you when I see you.
Well, you guys are wonderful, and this has been an incredible episode. I hope you all go check out Zach's Bridge. We will put their links in the show notes below. And if you have any questions for Kelly and I, or want to be a guest on our podcast, you can email me at info@goldribbon-kids.org, or you can email Kelly at kgoddard@nationalpcf.org. Again, we'll put all this in the show notes. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.